I like old school pop and soul because it always puts me in a good mood, and I like listening to George Michael's.
I like indie at the moment in many different varieties and forms because it sounds very genuine, it's not overly produced, and it gives a very feeling of realness.
I like indie rock because I like Bombay Bicycle Club.
I love R&B music.
I like soul music because I've grown up with it since I was a kid.
I like folk music because it's relaxing.
I like rock because it expresses excitement and aggression.
I like pop music because I enjoy listening to it while I work and it keeps me going.
I like house and techno because it makes me dance.
I like classical music because it soothes me.
I like rock, mainly because of the guitars and the bass. I like music.
I like music.
I love music.
I like music.
I love music.
I like music.
I love music.
I love music. I like music.
I like music.
And I like music.
It's safe to say that music has changed a lot in the last 20 years, as the industry has become enriched with new genres and subgenres. With the current state of popular music, everybody always talks about the technological aspects of it, from streaming to illegal downloading, to producing and distributing your own music right from the comfort of your own bedroom. With new technology and the idea of having the X factor, it could be argued that music is pretty much driven by a mass market. With the internet serving as a platform for the freedom of speech, everyone is voicing their own opinions on current music. Some find it worse than ever, but others believe it's simply reflecting the current world status and societies that we live in. So what are the thoughts on current popular music?
I think it's too perfect. I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the studio. It makes it unobtainable to perform live, and I think it gives an unobtainable idea to people who want to get into music, who want to get into singing or performing or playing or whatever. I think it gives them this idea that you have to sound like that. You're going to sound note perfect every single time. Everything's going to be absolutely spot on. And then when it doesn't work like that, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to go to training, and you've got to, do your lessons, then they find it disheartening, yeah.
With criticisms of pop music sounding too perfect and too robotic nowadays, people have started to miss the raw emotion behind lyrics and crave the return of live sounds, funky bridges, and drum solos.
There's people like Bruno Mars now that have got full bands on stage with them, nothing pre-recorded, all live, and sounding brilliant. I do love Bruno Mars. So.
I think because of distribution changes and changes in technology and people's behaviour because of that, the way that they listen, the way that they hear new music, the way that they appreciate music and use it, it's become quite a different industry than it was, let's say, 20 years ago.
I think the impact of home studios and the internet has revolutionised the whole of the music landscape in the last 10 years. It's meant that there are more outlets for people to play live. There are more outlets for them to record their own videos, edit them, their own music, cut it, master it, so it sounds pretty good. So there's far more ability for people to have exposure for what they do. And I think the percentage of what's crap and what's good is probably the same as it's ever been. The crap will always be crap, and the good will always be good. It's just that it's a bit cheaper and easier for the good people to produce music and visuals to go with it and play without it costing them as much as it used to.
There used to be a time when music would develop organically. People would come together, play their instruments and sing their thoughts without worrying about music charts and single sales. There were no overnight trends or crazes setting the bar for a successful song.
Years and years ago, there used to be lots of what we'd call youth cultures, which would grow up in a particular local area. And you think of things like grunge happening in Seattle. You think of the thing I was involved in, Manchester in the 80s or the early 90s. You think of back to the Beatles and the beat music in the 60s. So that's how music used to develop. It used to develop locally with a little scene that developed and became bigger. To some extent, there's not a lot happening new because it doesn't get time to be nurtured in a particular area and be discovered. It's out there in your face straight away.
I think the problem now is because record companies are having such an awful time of it, it's very difficult for trends to develop. So what happens is now, as soon as unless bands are making vast amounts of money for the record business or for the people that are kind of investing money into them, they're dropped very, very quickly. And so we've got a situation in this country now and around the world where there's lots of bands who are being dropped from record labels and so on before they've had chance, if you want, to flourish and to maybe develop a scene and a trend around them.
Whether those sorts of things could ever happen anymore, I'm not so sure. So I think that's one big factor in modern music, is that modern music doesn't get trends coming from local areas anymore. And I think because of the immediacy of something happening, let's say on one side of the world, and it becomes big on the other side of the world within a week, has affected the sort of trends that happen in music.
I think the other key problem is the online situation, because things become so popular now, or things become so aware online. So going back maybe again 20 years ago, things would grow organically, so fans would discover, young kids might discover something in a playground and then they'd tell their friends about it and then they'd tell somebody else about it. So what you saw was this organic building of a fan base and a trend growing around that whole thing. Now, as soon as something has a smell of being successful, it's all over Twitter, it's all over Facebook, it's all over everywhere, and it's not given a chance to grow or to organically develop. And so it either dies very quickly or, kind of grows into something other than a trend, really.
It is no secret that the music industry has struggled since the introduction of internet platforms like YouTube and SoundCloud. There was a time when hearing your first song on the radio was a special day for an artist. It meant you were finally being recognised. Nowadays it's all about views, virtual likes and downloading.
There is such a diversity of radio music now. You take something like Radio 6 and you add in Radio 2 and a little bit of Radio 1, and almost any kind of music can have radio airplay at the moment. And if you've got that much airplay, very little of it stands out. Where it really makes an impact is on YouTube. If you get a large number of YouTube hits for something you've done, then that causes people to be interested in it. But of course the backlash of that is people may not bother to buy the music.
If you plant a money tree, don't be arsing around, pruning and guarding the leaves.
The question is, with people turning to streaming and not investing in tangible music anymore, does this mean the industry has lost its value?
Cause £50 notes are the hardest to grow.
Well, I think people are willing to pay for it. They just don't buy as many albums, but single sales are strong. So it's certainly changed in how it appeals to people, how they find it, and what makes the decision about them wanting to buy it. And I know for every one single sold, there must be 5 or 6 that are illegally shared. So with single sales being high, and you know that this much illegal sharing is going on, means that the music itself is very popular still.
Music is generally valuable, but I think less particularly valuable to people. And it's not got so much to do with the fact that you can get it for free. I think it's got to do with the attention span. Our attention spans have changed hugely in the last 10, 15 years.
To capture someone's attention, music is not enough nowadays. It's now about the image as a whole and how you present yourself.
Music comprises some sort of technical proficiency to be able to play it, but it also involves creativity and imagination in being able to write songs, but also to present yourself practically like an actor, a performer.
Generally, the best an artist can do in the mainstream is to be very, very visible, and then everybody wants to know what they sound like. And if they sound crap, well, they won't get played. But if they sound halfway interesting, they will probably be a slightly newsy item. You know, they become the breaking band. And then after that, if they're awful, well, nobody will ever hear them again. And if they do carry on to great things, then, you know, they will be followed by the radio all the way. That's why people go to the trouble of making stunts, you know, and they used to do even more. The Sex Pistols was the obvious and famous one. You know, but artists will do things to be noticed. But it's rarely for the music. It's for their presence, their look.
Artists now have to reinvent themselves and their music in order to keep up with the current high-tech market. Two of the greatest examples of reinventing themselves are Madonna and David Bowie. This is why they're still selling albums and touring arenas today, and are responsible for inspiring younger artists. However, reinvention would be nothing if there was not enough media coverage to go with it.
I think the media itself is very important, and there's two types of media. There's the mainstream media, which can be dictated to by the political, by the industry itself. But often they look for fun, don't they? They want something that's a bit different, engaging, causes attention. So, for instance, they will always look on the bad side of anybody, and they look for something that to shock people with.
Shocking people also holds a lot of power. Lady Gaga started her professional career using a shock tactic, with unique gimmicks that led to her being one of the most talked about musicians at the time, and created a lot of headlines. But due to the excessive amount of exposure and minimal censorship, audiences have now warmed to these shock elements, and artists are finding it harder and harder to now shock or impress their markets.
A lot of today is based on celebrity culture and things like that. There's a lot of like, you know, what's going to go in Heat magazine or OK, or it's going to be on one of those TV channels and everyone's going to be talking about how shocking they are. It's like Lady Gaga, she's still being as wacky as she was last year, but it's not quite as much.
Yeah, there's less impact.
Yeah.
Like, you should walk out in a meat dress now and they're like, meh.
She's done that before.
It's been done.
Yeah, those stupid high shoes, she did that last year.
We get easily bored nowadays, I think. If an artist, superstar or otherwise, doesn't put in an appearance very often, then they can sometimes have a mystical quality where everybody wants to know where they are. But mainly we're too busy looking at the people who are around. And so superstars have got to keep putting out music. They've got to keep having a presence. And again, I'm back to that point, they've got to be visible. And then people will buy the album. But eventually they will very likely have a bad album. And people will still buy it because it's them. But they may not buy the next one because the last one wasn't so good. So they've got to continue to be good. They've got to continue to keep their brand, their image up.
Even if you're a superstar, you need to make good music, because that is what the audience ultimately wants, even if this means enlisting feature artists or being a feature artist yourself.
I think a way to stay popular or go with the trend, stay relevant, is using collaborations. Collaborating with someone that's massively in the public eye is going to be very helpful for a dying career. If you go in and collaborate with someone who's doing really, really well, you're automatically getting your song up in the top 10. And that's definitely good for you, because that might make people check out the rest of your career, the rest of your back catalogue, what you're doing at the moment. So that'll definitely put eyes on you. But collaborations are also a good thing for rising artists, people that want to start their own trends. I've mentioned Bruno Mars before, but he came in on a track doing Billionaire, wasn't it? I think he sang for Billionaire and no one knew who he was, but then from that he exploded, doing collaborations with everyone, and boom, brought out his own album and took his own career. Collaborations are always helpful wherever you are in your career, to start you off or even to give you a boost if your popularity is waning.
Gaining longevity as an artist and selling your music is a struggle nowadays. Artists do try and stay true to themselves, their music and their art, but living in this capital-driven world, artists sometimes have no choice but to follow certain musical trends and bestsellers in order to be supported by major record labels. But is this a bad thing?
Following trends isn't bad in one way. If something's just taking off and you're in the first wave of those artists, then it's not bad, because you've got a chance to position yourself at the forefront. So you don't have to be the originator. You can follow in the footsteps of someone, as long as you're very quick. But what you have to do is try to establish a part of the market or a part of the area that you're working in, which is just yours.
Artists can't avoid following trends, to be honest. I mean, every artist makes a certain kind of music, and then it evolves according to what's happening around them. The very first music they make will be the very first music that they hear and enthuse about. So people made punk because they heard punk, and they really got off on that, and it became a kind of brushfire thing. Suddenly everybody was doing something that was approximately like punk. What's bad is if artists stay with trends when they could be moving on. If they're not being adventurous and they're not challenging themselves, and indeed moving with the times, then they will probably die as a band or an artist.
Two of the greatest trendsetters or trend makers in the world, I would consider, in the last, again, 50 years, is John Cale from the Velvet Underground and Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. Now, those two people were involved in bands that were responsible for making a million other bands get together. But there's lots of bands that follow trends, you know, so if you look at it, for example, you know, a band who's been hugely successful over the last 25, 30 years, however long it is now, is a band like U2, but they weren't trendsetters by any stretch of the imagination. You know, they followed and copied bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, The Cure, or they took the bits of lots of other things that were going on at that time and they turned it into what they were doing. Does that make them a bad band? Well, if you judge them financially, certainly not, because they've made certainly more money than any of those bands that I just talked about. Does it make them groundbreaking? Probably not, because they probably weren't that groundbreaking. They didn't really change anything. They didn't really set any trends or anything, but were they an important band for the music business? Well, probably they were. And so there's lots of examples with bands that don't necessarily set trends, but are still hugely successful.
The world is driven by trends and trendsetters and who has the most followers. Trends are everywhere: politics, society, fashion, and of course, music. And because so many things happen all at the same time, how do you decide which trend is best to follow? Well, it's mostly about trust.
I think everybody follows trends, as in fashion, as in wanting to feel that the people who are at the top of their game in fashion or in TV or music, the ones who dictate what people are hearing or what's being exposed on TV or radio. I think that there's a trust there that goes with that role. So if it's, I don't know, Jean-Paul Gaultier or whoever, Stella McCartney or whatever she's doing on the catwalk, 3 months later is everywhere, that's setting a trend, which she's entrusted with doing that because she's built her business and her eye for fashion and talent. So you can follow that in a broad sense, but you do need to be original in some way to get the attention of people who are out looking to be entertained.
Even if people do trust you, there will always be those who criticise artists and what they do once they become mainstream, even if they were loved by many in the underground or indie scene.
There's a group of people who like to think they're the intelligentsia, right? And they're the people who see something before anybody else. And it's always been the case that when it becomes mainstream and every Tom, Dick and Harry, every ordinary Joe likes it too, then those people, the trendsetters, the early adopters, if you want to use the marketing terms, the intelligentsia, they will always drop those artists straight away. There are exceptions. So, for instance, an artist like Bob Dylan in the 60s, but the Velvet Underground, their first 3 albums, none of them made the American top 200, right? The only way they got known was because artists in this country said that they were listening to the Velvet Underground. So it became a really cool thing to be into, the Velvet Underground. Because they never became the mainstream, they always remained cool. But it's very difficult for bands to do that.
With music coming from underground and heading to mainstream, the crossover of genres and the development of subgenres has led to a lot of debate about music evolution. Some say it's at its worst state, but others can't help but press the replay button.
Music can't not evolve. It's culture. It's an element of culture, and culture in turns is a reflection of huge forces. At the end, it's geological forces, but let's say it's political forces, economic forces, and the rest. So music is reflecting very largely those changes.
Music is evolving all the time. It's very exciting all the time. The different argument about it is will we have another Beatles, or will we have another Rolling Stones, or will we have another whatever it might be? That's a different kind of argument, because that's to do with market forces, and that's to do with the record business, and to do with how big artists can become. But music is as exciting and is kind of moving along faster than it's ever moved along before, I think.
In other words, we're not talking about evolution, we're talking about revolution. Now, sometimes music just trundles along doing its own thing, getting a little different in one direction and not in another. And occasionally, and again you often point to punk, you have a revolution, and that's when it doesn't evolve, it suddenly makes a leap, a jump, a step change in what it's doing. And when that happens, and I suppose you'd say hip-hop was another example of it, and back in the day, rock and roll was it. On those occasions, music changes its nature quickly and excitingly and catches everybody out. So when it's evolving, everybody's happy in the industry, because that means that they can keep their economic tabs on it all the time and make sure that it's doing the job it's meant to do. But then the industry gets caught out by punk and by hip-hop, and by rock and roll, and has to adjust very quickly. And that's sometimes when the most interesting music comes out, in the revolution, not the evolution.
Taking into consideration all the factors that play a role in music sales, including endorsement deals and reality TV shows and shocking stunts, what is it that defines the success of a musician, and what should they do?
If you want to be discovered by people, write great songs. Don't read a book how to be successful in the music business. Come to Sound City to meet people, because you need to meet people. You need to meet all the important business people from all around the world, and you also need to meet other bands, other artists. You need to watch other bands, other artists. Sound City is an amazing opportunity to see bands from all over the world, so you can see how good you are against those other bands from around the world. And then on the conference side of it, it's a great place to meet business people who can actually play a part in your destiny, really. But don't think it's all about just knowing people. Everything begins and ends with great songs.
I suppose it's the links with an audience. At the end of the day, it doesn't make any difference what the artist does for themselves. If they maintain a relationship with a buying public, that's important. New acts are finding it really difficult. So a lot of the large venues, things like the arenas, are really worried because new acts don't have that relationship with their fans.
You have to work very, very hard and concentrate very, very hard. And you have to work out what it is that's the most true thing that you do, and make sure that you do that as often as possible. But the old question is, if you're crap, you're crap. You know what I mean? And if you've got determination and genius, then sometime in your lifetime, or in the lifetime of the people after you, you will be fated for what you did. And if you don't have an ego that wants a lot of money now, or fame now, and is just prepared to have entered the great stream of culture at a high level, then your dream will come true.
So, ultimately, it is all about the music that artists believe in, and the music that they're proud of. After all, it's not about what's trending.
of it lingers here in the valley. My flesh cannot protect my heart. Now we depend on memories we made before the summer sun drove everything we had underground. And ghosts like us will